Today's topic will probably be one of the most impactful. Now, mainly, so we're going to talk about enhancing libido in female bikini athletes predominantly, because a lot of people don't understand that shredded, lean, amazing physique, which a lot of people find extremely attractive, oftentimes come with absolute lack of sex drive, libido, and whatnot. So touching up on that, it's quite important, very powerful. And well, a lot of guys will experience the same stuff, you know, when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to be shredded and this and that and walk around like this all year round. And I'm like, yeah, you're also going to be miserable, brain dead. And last thing you'll be interested is the reason you are trying to get lean is to get female attraction, but you will not be attracted to anyone at all, because all you want to do is just sleep. So could you kind of touch up on topic of libido, its importance, unique characteristics, and the context of female health tied towards libido?
Well, libido, basically the female's sexual desire. It's very crucial for their overall well-being. The emotional connections they can establish in relationships, which is going to lead to relationship satisfaction, just their physical and even mental health, well-being, possibly even in the terms of reproductive health. Libido is very important, or a healthy libido is very important, because typically, if there's an issue with libido, there's a health issue to some degree. So understanding what's involved in libido, which is a very, very complex topic, you can really, go down the rabbit hole trying to discover what's causing the increase or the decrease. So it's very, very important, and of course, very complicated.
So most common things, could you have issues with libido without being lean? That's the thing. So what could cause that, and then how do you kind of unpack it, and then how does it come into play when you are trying to get even leaner? Let me say this: would it be important to have good sexual health drive, whatever, before you start dieting?
Well, I would say ideally it's important to have a healthy sex drive all the time. And of course, there are loads of females that have issues with libido that aren't incredibly lean or possibly even dieting, because the impacts of so many lifestyle factors can affect libido. It's not just the state of body fat percentage. It starts from the mesolimbic pathway. So it's a dopamine pathway in our brain, which is where libido basically is coming from. And so you can imagine the psychological thoughts, how they can impact libido. So oftentimes you'll see females struggling with body image, which is very, very common, drastically affects their libido. So they can be very lean, causing libido issues from a hormonal problem. They can be very lean, causing libido issues from a psychological problem, but they can also be not lean, not dieting, and still have libido issues, because it's just such a multifaceted issue that it depends exactly what's out of whack in the system. It's a very complex system. You have the neurotransmitters, hormones, social pressures, all these things kind of impact libido in general.
So is there any way how to even track it? And how does training affect libido in positive or negative way? And where does nutrition come in this as well? So is there something that you can say like, hey, if you eat like this, it's going to improve your libido? Or if you don't follow nutrition plan, this is better for you? Or what are the merits about that you kind of follow? Hey, don't overstep these things, or it's going to have a negative effect on your sexual health.
For sure. Obviously, with pretty much anything in life, a healthy lifestyle, nutrition, etc., is always a positive. And libido is no different. So if you're eating a well-balanced diet, that's very, very important to establishing, at least the foundation for strong libido. In terms of like a specific food, there's nothing really that's going to be improving libido unless there's a deficiency that's occurred, and then possibly improving that can. But typically, from a training aspect, you can get acute hormonal effects from training that can have an acute impact on libido. But in general, it's the overall body composition and the health of the organism, basically, that's going to determine a healthy libido or not. So I would say that regular exercise and proper nutrition is part of the foundation for everything that we're doing, but obviously that includes libido. If you have a malnourished body, or a very imbalanced energy in, energy out equation, poor nutrition, high body fat, excess of alcohol, possibly smoking, all these things are going to negatively impact libido.
We have looked on some supplements, we have looked on some fat burners and all those kind of things. Any of them playing positive or negative role on libido?
So both. It depends which ones. Obviously, the endocrine system can largely impact libido, and male and female. Females that are using performance-enhancing drugs, for example, there are certain choices that will drive their libido to a teenage boy level where they're almost like a predator. Some people actually do this on purpose for specific reasons. And then obviously there are other supplements that will improve things like blood flow. You can get supplements that help produce more dopamine, things like this. But it really kind of depends on the situation and the individual, to say for sure. But certain supplements, for example, a lot of people have depressive issues, so they take selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, so SSRIs. They are known to reduce libido. And then obviously excessive dieting can reduce libido. Stress is very hard on libido. One thing that I have all my female athletes check is their stress levels. I keep them checking a daily score, score of 1 to 10, what's your stress level like? And they score that. And oftentimes they'll think like, well, I don't have a stressful job, or I don't have a stressful life. And that may be the case, but the body doesn't distinguish the different types of stress. It just reacts to the level of stress you're under. So whether you're being chased by, a lion or slamming on your brakes because of a red light, the body doesn't know the difference. It just knows the reaction. So what people fail to realize is that being in an energy deficit, which women seem to live in, is stressful. And it can get to the point where the body's under a chronic level of stress. And that can really, really crash libido. And typically, females that are excessively dieting, trying to get lean, that aren't using hormonal support or taking some sort of supplementation to help, they're usually seeing very negative effects on the libido in general.
What are the positive effects of libido? So what actually comes out of it? We are talking, if somebody just wants to look good, why would they care about libido?
Well, why would you not want a strong libido? It's going to improve their lifestyle in a lot of ways. In relationships, obviously, it's very important. Even in their self-confidence, having a healthy libido is important. People will kind of display that self-confidence, and if there's a low libido, you just see an opposite effect. There's the importance of reproductive health, like I mentioned earlier. And I think the big thing is the ability to establish some intimacy with a romantic partner or whatever. That libido connection, I mean, that is sort of the basis of what everyone's looking for. It starts off with that desire for somebody, and then if there's no libido or very poor libido, that usually starts to cause an issue, especially if it's one-sided, which we see often.
Yeah, because a lot of people will never recognize and admit that whenever they are trying to change their physique, it might not be for health reasons. It might be to improve their relationships, maybe because they don't feel attractive enough, or it might be because they want to increase their wealth, because they feel more confident and now they can negotiate with people at much higher level and so on and so forth. To me, a lot of people neglect this side and then kind of lose the sense of importance of being healthy overall, not just physically, but mentally as well. And if you're mentally not there, you turn in one of those who keeps talking about how gym is their church, but then when they leave their church, so to speak, they go home and just fight with depressive thoughts all the time.
Yeah, and that's super common. And the thing is, then when it comes to libido, is there's like a cycle that's involved. Like there's the desire, then the arousal, and then the orgasm. So there could be and that's all sort of part of libido, but there could be an issue with one or all of those factors, and they'll be from different reasons. The desire oftentimes is a psychological thing. There needs to be good communication. There needs to be self-confidence. They need to have they need to feel good about themselves. If a female doesn't feel good about herself, she's probably not going to be overly interested in helping others feel good as well. So there needs to be that sort of positive body image associated with this. And then that's a more of a psychological aspect, definitely not my lane, but very, very prominent and important when it comes to libido. And then there's the arousal, like the ability, and that is oftentimes tied in with the endocrine system. So like if a hormone or hormones are out of balance, or possibly, you have an issue with dopamine or serotonin or some sort of neurotransmitter issue, that can be an issue there as well. And then of course, then there's the orgasm aspect, which is a part of libido, but not totally, but a little bit, I guess, different than what we're talking about.
So what is there any kind of specific nutritional strategies that could improve your libido? So let's say if you want to do long distance running, you're going to eat like that. If you want to do very sharp, short movements, you might eat different. Is there anything nutritionally that you would say, hey, eat more predominantly, let's say plant-based or whatever other crazy thing that actually has some evidence that this might get your sex health better quicker? Or is there nothing out there, or is it too many things to tie together?
To my knowledge, there's not a specific way of eating for libido other than ensuring the essentials are being met, which should be the case. But when you factor in what type of training they're doing, I think where it becomes important is that you want to be fueling your body adequately for that type of training. So if it's a lot of output, like a long distance runner, like marathon runners, they need to have carbohydrates in their diet. If they're running a very, very, very high output, energy output environment, and they're just trying to do this on fats or mostly fats and plant-based nutrition, they're running their body into the ground in general, and that will impact libido in multiple ways. So there's not really a way to know exactly how and what aspect of the libido will become compromised, because it'll be coming from multiple factors. And then obviously if you're doing a more high intensity output, which is also going to be more carb based, same sort of thing. If you have, and I've worked with some athletes that started before I started working with them anyways, they were doing high intensity training on low carb dieting. The body can replete glycogen without you eating carbs, but it takes 30 hours, 36 hours. Like it takes days for that to do that. And if you're going back to your training session every day or every other day, you're not repleting as quickly as you're depleting. And the body's being run to the ground. And I have worked on people that have actually now put themselves onto hormone replacement therapy, medically prescribed, because they ran their endocrine system into the ground from that type of atmosphere. So the type of training needs to be fueled appropriately. But I think it's a little bit separate from how that impacts libido, but indirectly it's related, because if you are underfueling the body in general, libido will be impacted. And at the end of the day, from a biological point of view, if the body is in a sense of malnourishment, where it doesn't think there's enough food to go around, it's not really going to be seeking procreation and having babies, because if there's not enough fuel for me, how can there be enough for offspring? So from a survival point of view of the species, even the system just down regulates So what you constantly see is just literally a lack of adequate fuel, which is impacting libido. Now, of course, because the fitness industry is super vain and drugs are prominent and being pushed by people that really don't know what they're doing, they can out drug that. So you eat like nothing and you run on the treadmill every day because you're a bikini athlete and you're being starved coach, but here's some hormones. You feel like everything's great. Christmas is still in your eyes. Um, and a few months after that, you'll realize that, oh shit, this something's not right.
Yeah, you'll realize if you are lucky. More often than not, we see that people don't realize it sometimes ever.
Yeah, and I think those people are the ones that are keep it masked. So like they keep doing something that's not allowing the true indication of what's going on be realized. If I keep giving them hormones, I can keep their libido here, 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 or here, regardless of everything else, and I can keep them growing muscle too. And I think that's what you see, which is part of why we've been discussing this series. You see a lot of drugs being almost abused. A lot is for that reason because stopping them and people are feeling like shit, so they don't want to.
So when you look in all this, apart from psychologically not feeling like you're up to anything and whatnot, are there any kind of blood tests that people can do and check, hey, this is out of whack, maybe I need this supplement or this kind of a hormone replacement treatment or whatever? Are there anything that's showing up in blood that's consistent with low libido?
Hormone values are very, very powerful in showing libido, obviously from the endocrine point of view. From things like the dopamine pathway and stuff, to my knowledge, and again, I don't get into the psychology of things too much, but to my knowledge, there's no way of measuring the neurotransmitters in the brain in a living person. So they can measure serum values of certain neurotransmitters, but not in the brain. So you can't really get, to my knowledge anyways, any sort of testing that's going to say, yeah, your libido is not good because your dopamine, serotonin is imbalanced. I don't know of anything that can show that. As far as I understand, there is nothing yet, but hormones are very indicative of what's going on. And then you can look at, that's also including, like, say, thyroid. But then just in general, anytime there's a deficiency in blood work, it's going to have an impact somewhere. It's common to have low libido with low iron, and females are notoriously having low iron from menstruation. So making sure they have adequate iron in their foods or supplementing with, some sort of iron can help. But I'm not a big fan of just throwing things like drugs and supplements at people without blood work. But blood work, any imbalance, I think is important to look at. I'm working with a marathon runner right now, actually, that has, via blood work, it shows basically malnutrition. Markers are out of whack, saying like, okay, I don't think there's a lot of energy surplus here at all to fuel the performance you're doing and keep the body functioning. And you're seeing things like irregular menstruation and certain blood markers saying like, okay, we've got an issue like anemia and stuff like that. So I would start with definitely deficiencies. But if you're literally curious about libido, the hormone panel is probably going to be the biggest indicator from a blood point of view.
So which kind of hormones would you definitely check, and would it be something related to stress hormones as well, or anything about after that?
Absolutely, that's a good point.
We always go like, hey, if you have high testosterone, you have high sex drive, and it's kind of flipping around, and men and women completely opposite. Then, so
yeah. Definitely, I would be checking the sex hormones for sure. We know that testosterone in females will increase libido. I don't know of a condition, and I've never come across a person whose libido didn't go up from exogenous testosterone put into a female. I'm not a big fan of putting testosterone into females, though. I don't think it's overly necessary, other than possibly just that replacement therapy level.
Which is,
but I would definitely.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of acknowledge how small the amount for women that is.
Yeah, very, very, very small. I would definitely be checking the sex hormones, and like you said, cortisol is a good measure because that's just basically showing your body's response to overall stress. I would actually pay attention to inflammation markers in general, but the hormone values, I would be starting with the sex hormones for sure, and then from there, like it is a very complex topic. So it could be that the hormone values are fine and there's still a libido issue. I'm working with an adult film star, and her values are decent, and my job is to improve her libido via pathways that aren't including hormones, because we can't really use exogenous hormones because we can't afford masculinization to any more of a degree for her career. So we're working on other things. But the hormone panel was obviously the go-to check, and probably should be for pretty much anyone when it comes to that.
So what would be your recommendations for any kind of supplements that could improve this, and also any kind of performance enhancing drugs that play a role in this, and which one would probably be something that you would avoid at all costs?
Supplement wise, I don't think there is a supplement that's going to be necessarily game changing unless you're improving a deficiency. So I would start with the basics, like vitamin D should be adequate. Essential fatty acids should always be in play if you're not eating them. I work with a lot of females that just aren't interested in eating fatty fish. So if you're not eating fatty fish, you almost certainly are going to need an essential fatty acid supplement. And then from there, things like arginine can improve blood flow, which would be possibly beneficial at improving the arousal part of libido, not necessarily the desire. And then maybe something like a precursor to dopamine, like tyrosine or some sort of supplement, could impact that, and that may impact the desire aspect of libido. And from there, it depends. If there's an issue with orgasm, that's a whole new topic. But oftentimes, there's an imbalance with estrogen, and then you get dryness or lack of lubrication from low levels of estrogen. So possibly looking at estrogen values can improve that. From a hormonal point of view, like when you're talking about exogenous anabolics, almost anything will improve a female's libido. They're very, very sensitive to these things. They're very powerful. The more to that center column testosterone range you are, the bigger the impact is going to have on their libido. Like giving a female testosterone is probably going to be the biggest driver to increase libido, but it's going to be quite masculinizing as well. So if it's over and above their therapeutic levels, like their TRT dose, the risk might not be worth the reward here. I think that would come to the individual. But I have
It's very obvious now that you can see very, very masculine women in bodybuilding shows.
Yes. Now,
wrong advice, wrong placing, misuse, abuse, and many other things.
And almost certainly from a desire point of view, those women are hungry. Like there's enough androgenic levels in that body that's trumping any other potential things that might be going on, because it's just so powerful. Their libido is probably through the roof, like you see with many, many male competitors. Unfortunately, with the male competitors is sometimes there's a lot of desire and not a lot of function because of misuse. Where the females, that depends, because if there's a or an imbalance in the hormones, the desire could still be very, very high. And if there's an issue, usually it's that lubrication issue, and obviously they have things to solve that problem. So that's usually not a big deal. But yeah, definitely the masculine, muscular females are they're potentially predators.
Yeah, would it be correct to assume that this might be also a role that is a reason why women like these kind of things, not just for muscle building, but because their sex drive improves drastically, and now they live in pretty much completely different lives than what they were doing before?
I've never I've never thought about that, to be honest. But I do think there's a reason why a male and female hormones, we all have the same hormones, but we have different levels of them. And I do think there is a very obvious reason, many reasons why that is. I think driving a female's hormones too high to be similar to a male is literally transgender therapy, which is exactly what they do to accomplish that. And vice versa. If we take a male's testosterone levels and just castrate them and push estrogen values up, you get the exact opposite. So you get the transgender to a female now. So I do think it's important. And I do think there's a reason why those hormones are what they are. Yeah, for sure. But I've never really actually thought about that, to be honest.
I only bring it up because I have spoken with a lot of women who have gone that route, and they have, and I asked them what were your fears, what were you expecting, this and that, and the number one fear is usually, oh, I was afraid about virilization and that my genitalia are gonna change and this and that, and then I asked them, well, has it paid off? She's like, well, I'm actually very satisfied that they did change because now I feel much better. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So that sounds like they're least concerned after they actually have had that experience, whereas they're more concerned about like facial change and, you know, getting the square jaw and starting to shave and these kind of things.
Yeah, my experience has been exactly the same. Any female that's noticed any change, it's been subtle enough that all it did is basically increase sensitivity, which improved the orgasm part of, you know, the libido cycle. And they've all mostly been pleasantly, you know, pleased by that. To get to the level of typically the undesirable effects, usually that's from chronic abuse and very, very long durations, or one run unlucky outlier, which happens for sure, but usually that's just not common.
So I'll try to summarize it. So, and libido as such could be a great predictor if you're healthy.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
it can negatively be affected by you trying to diet down, and more often than not, you mentioned something that women are chronically in calorie deficit without even knowing that. So, and it's extremely hard to change them. And just not even women, even a lot of guys I work with, they are in calorie deficit 24/7 for 3, 4, 5 years in a row, and you try to change them. Hey, this is not good. You're not changing because you're not giving your body energy to change. This is nothing going to happen. So, and then trying to mask it with any kind of supplements or drugs will not resolve the issue.
No, definitely not. I think right now too, I think the social pressures are higher, probably now more so than ever. They've always been, there's always been a lot more social pressure on females to look a certain way than males, which has been unfortunate because it's really driven a lot of what, you know, how they are and how they react to certain things now, and what, you know, what we're seeing. But now the social pressures are going to become just as much on males as females, because literally everyone is living in a virtual world and you're meeting each other on apps. So everyone's trying to look a certain way. I think what we're going to see is libido issues, largely impacted by a psychological thing and social pressures,
Right.
more so than hormones. Hormones will always be a factor, but I think what's going to happen now is we're getting people that are so focused on body image that they never feel they look good enough. They're going to have a lower self-esteem, and this is, all these things are going to spiral into a lower libido. And I think that's going to be a bit of a cobweb of, you know, to solve for sure.
Would you say for anyone who is trying to get like super lean to also take a notice of this side, just to make sure that, hey, if you are running into issues with your libido at expense of looking great, you might be probably going a bit too fast, too hard, and you can still get in shape by just taking a bit slower approach. Make sure that you are keeping healthy and actually enjoy that new body instead of forcing yourself to look a certain way and secretly being nearly depressed about it, because you look great,
100%, yeah.
but you're mentally just struggling.
100%. And we've been talking about this entire series. Like that longer, lower, slower approach is definitely the way for longevity and sustainability. But I think it's equally important that the females understand what they're doing, understand their goal, and understand timelines, because there may come a point where you need to be aggressive, and that's okay. And if it's possible, or if it's necessary, we know, okay, we have to be aggressive. We may suffer this, this, and this, but it's a short term. We know it's coming. We know how to remedy it after. But if they're just constantly doing that, extremes, they're causing all kinds of problems, and libido will be one of them. And you'll just not really know exactly what did what and when and how to go about fixing the problem when it's done, if it's ever done.
So would you say it would be important to kind of, if you embark a journey of fat loss, always make sure that you are checking your blood panel maybe every 6 months or so, just to make sure that you're not running into some kind of issues that show up unexpectedly?
I like people checking their bloods twice a year as a minimum. Almost always. There's a few conditions where I think an annual check is good enough. I have a few clients where once a year is okay. But if they're enhanced, I think twice a year is bare bones minimum, and probably a little bit more frequently, 3 or 4 times would be ideal. I'd also say if they're running into issues libido-wise, it depends on how they're going about their training and their lifestyle, but it's a good time to check bloods if all of a sudden there's a libido issue, because if you're not exactly sure, you're not positive what is going on, and you have bloods to support, you could see, okay, I have low estrogen, or I have low testosterone, or I have my cortisol's through the roof, or whatever. You can at least correlate that potentially part of the problem. And then, when things get back to normal and you check bloods again, you'll see if there's a correlation there. And usually if you're paying attention, the puzzle pieces fit together and it makes sense. But it's easier if you're taking your time and strategizing everything. If you're just literally aggressively doing everything all at once, you're causing so many issues that you can't pinpoint it.
Yeah. So it's just being mindful that having a great body might come at its cost, and just understand what it might take out of you, and if you're willing to pay that cost, and is it even necessary? So, because we both know women can get in phenomenal shape if they take their time, fix their health first, maybe even eat more than as they have done before, just to understand that it's not all about calorie deficits. It's about calorie deficit through means of healthy body rather than calorie deficits through means of starvation.
100%. And then if you look at a female that's working hard and feeling good, and her self-confidence shows that's a lot more attractive to pretty much everybody than someone that, maybe has this shredded six-pack but just looks like they feel like shit and they're always moping around. Like, nobody wants to hang around that. Like, so oftentimes what you're seeing is people are killing themselves to get to this ultra level of leanness, and their libido is in the garbage. So they're looking a certain way for, a certain amount of attention that they can't use anyway. Yeah. And that's where they start to then supply themselves with exogenous hormones to fulfill that. And then now you're trapped. Now you look the part, you're feeling fantastic, but everything is, I don't want to say fake, but everything is, in a sense, artificial. And then if one of those aspects is pulled out of the equation, you're just not the same. And we struggle with that. People struggle with that psychologically at that point. The psychological aspect of libido is very complex, but when it comes to the females, it seems self-image, self-worth, all these things, that's really, really a big player. And if they're constantly unhappy with what they see, it's negatively impacting their libido and most likely their life.
Awesome, Scott. I'm going to leave you on that note, and I'll see you in next videos.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.